To really succeed at university, it's not just about how well you do in the classroom and what grades you get. For the really big kudos to really get ahead of the game, you may have to prove you can survive a night in a haunted mansion. This is a film about 4 university freshmen who, as part of their initiation, have to spend a night in this local abandoned mansion. I'm not sure if it's technically a mansion or a house, but for the sake of this review, I'm just going to call it a mansion. Now, I'm not personally familiar with the American university system, so I just have to kind of ride through the first 10 minutes of this film as best I can. It's still enjoyable, but we don't have terms like initiations or pledges or sorority houses. If, when I did go to university myself, I had been asked to spend my first night in an abandoned mansion with 2 young women who looked like Linda Blair and Suki Goodwin, I would have been amenable to that. I do think that it's important when you go to uni that you try and make an effort to get involved in social events and stuff. But getting back to the movie, this is no normal abandoned mansion. It has a bit of a checkered history. So it turns out that 10 or 11 years before this film begins, there was this guy living there who murdered all of his sons and daughters because they were deformed and he didn't like it. And then he killed his wife and then himself. But one of his sons may have survived. In fact, 2 of his sons may have survived. But the people in charge of the initiations are not aware of this. They think they're just sending people into into what's an empty house in their minds. So 3 of them sneak into the grounds and set up all these elaborate pranks to try and scare the people who were doing their initiation. So for instance, they put these little small tannoys behind the curtains and then press buttons on this remote outside the house so that screams go through the tannoys to try and scare the people who were in there. So you've got 2 groups of protagonists in this film. You've got these 3 people on the outside of the building and you've got these 4 people on the inside. And it's quite a unique hook for a horror film, having these 2 separate groups. And then, of course, you've got the killers who I believe have spent the majority of their lives living in these underground tunnels beneath the house. But when this movie starts, they start to come up into the house and take people out one by one. Now, I didn't come across this film by accident. This isn't just something that I randomly watched last week and thought, oh, I've got to do a review for this. Hell Night has been a big slasher film for me ever since I was a teenager. I randomly watched it when it came on TV this one time. I was only about 14 and it really scared me, some of the stuff in this. And I've been a fan of it ever since. And I think it was inevitable that once I started a horror YouTube channel, I was always going to get around to reviewing Hell Night. It was directed by somebody called Tom Desimone, who I think only did about 4 films in total, and Hell Night's probably the most well-known of them. He was more a porn director than anything else, so I don't know how he went from doing porn to Hell Night all of a sudden, but he has left most of his porn film sensibilities at the door. There are no sex scenes in this film. There are some scenes where characters are sort of rolling around in bed in their underwear, but I'm guessing DeSimeone maybe deliberately didn't put any sex in this film. Maybe he didn't want people looking at it and going, oh, look at this guy doing his typical porn thing. Although back in 81, there weren't traditionally that many sex scenes in films compared to now. So let's get into my positives, and I guess I'll just carry on talking a little bit more about the pranks. So there's also this one where the pranksters set up this projector to make this ghostly image cross this room. Now, even though I look at this and know that it's fake, even within the context of the story, it's still quite scary looking. And I think if Linda Blair had just pretended to be a little bit more scared by it, it could have been an even better scene than it is. But even after the pranksters die in this film, their handiwork is still being felt. So at times, characters will open a closet and a skeleton will pop out at them and stuff. There's so many little things that they've set up around this house, and it adds such a fun element to the movie. It is a film which is more about the atmosphere than the kills, which is really up my street. But if you didn't like Alien vs Predator 2 because of the darkness issue, then you may have a similar problem with this film. Lighting is very scarce. Inside the house, most of the rooms are lit by candles and it's okay, but outside there's no light at all. The only light is from the film crew who are actually filming the movie, and they're just showing just enough for you to be seeing what's going on. Sometimes characters are carrying flashlights, but it doesn't appear like much light is coming out of the flashlight. But there are so many good little locations used in the grounds of the mansion. We see the front gates a lot. The front gates are almost like another villain in this film because they're locked, but characters in their panic keep going to these gates. They try and shoot them open. They try and climb over the gates at one point. There's another character who actually gets the keys to use on the lock, and then a villain comes along and they get into a fight. For some reason, I really like the gates in this film. Now, there were also gates used a lot in Halloween H2O, and I hated those gates. I just wanted the film to go and explore the actual school a bit more. But in this film, it's a lot better somehow. There's also this incredible hedge maze. It's not one of those man-made hedge mazes. It's more of a kind of natural hedge maze where bushes have just kind of grown a bit funny over time, and now there's this weird set of interlinking paths. And the director knows what he's got here because there are several times characters run into this maze, and we get some high tension moments. There are also some good scenes on the roof of the house. They're not actually using the roof of the house as you look at it from the long shots. I think they've used a separate set, but they've done a good job in making sure the spires and the chimneys and stuff look as it should do. Now, as I said before, this is more about the atmosphere of this film than the kills. There are still some good kills. There are two in particular that really scared me the first time I watched this film. I mean, really scared me. So the first of those is when the blonde prankster falls down the hole. It's the first kill of the movie. I knew there were going to be kills in this film, but it just took me by surprise so much when this woman falls into a hole and lands in this hellish pit where there's somebody waiting to just kill her. I was like, whoa, Jesus. And the second one that really had an effect on me is the guy who finds his mate on the roof. He then goes in this, he goes on this panicky run towards the front gates. He climbs down this ladder thing, and his sprint to the gates goes on for quite some time. And then he goes the other way into the hedge maze, and his panicky run lasts so long that I actually thought to myself, the scene could change here. He might actually be all right, but no, he ends up getting killed. But I was so on edge watching that kill. I think all the stuff that happens on the outside of the house in this film is more effective than the stuff that happens on the inside. I think it's just the lack of light, and also all the very distinct little places they've got in the grounds, like the little it's like a little pond thing where one of the characters grapples with the killer late on. Acting wise, there is a bevy of talent associated with this and some great performances to boot. I'm guessing Linda Blair is the only name most people would recognize, and most people would probably associate her more with The Exorcist. I've only seen The Exorcist once, didn't particularly like it, and Linda Blair was a child in that film as well. For me, this is the quintessential Linda Blair film, Hell Night. Peter Barton's in the film as well, playing Linda Blair's love interest. He was also in Friday the 13th, the final chapter. I believe he played the guy who was killed by Jason in the shower, you know, when Jason punches through the shower curtain and pushes his head into the wall. He was probably only like the seventh or eighth most important person in that film, and yet he's probably better known for that than this film when he is the star alongside Linda Blair. There's also this great performance from a guy called Kevin Brophy, who I've never seen in anything else. He plays the lead prankster, and he only lasts half the movie, but some of the lines that he comes out with, they're so funny. I loved this performance, I really did. There's also a girl called Suki Goodwin, an English actress, and her love interest in the film, I forget the name of the guy who she sort of spends most of her scenes with, but both of those actors are great in this film as well. There's also a really terrific finale. It's not too much, it's not too little. Linda Blair's character fights the final bad guy near the gate. She manages to get this gate open, and she gets into the car, and the bad guy ends up on the roof, and they're spinning around, and then Linda Blair comes up with the idea of driving the car just below this gate, which is twisted sideways, and the bad guy gets impaled. But the way they filmed it is absolutely terrific. It's such a simple ending, but really satisfying. And just for one extra final touch, Linda Blair then sort of passes out until daylight and then wakes up. And it's such a nice shot when you see the daylight coming down on her, because we've had no daylight at all in this film. The film starts in the dark and proceeds in the darkness all the way up to that final shot. And just one thing which amused me a little bit, the final bad guy in this who dies on the roof rack, I think he looks just like the old Biff Tannen from Back to the Future 2. You know, the future version of Biff who walks with the cane and he uses the almanac to go back in time? Well, I swear the bad guy at the end of Hell Night looks just like Biff Tannen with that same makeup on. In terms of negatives for this film, the picture's not great. They've just released a second Blu-ray, I believe, and from reading the reviews, they've still not been able to do a really good remaster. There's something wrong with the original camera negatives of this film, apparently. So it's not ever going to get much better, I believe, than the current copy that I have on DVD. But maybe we don't need a perfect version for this. Maybe part of its charm is that it does look a little bit grainy and old. I don't know, you'd have to make your own mind up. My much larger problem with this movie is this really awkward 3 or 4 minute section where one of the characters escapes the grounds and goes to the police station, and the police just have no interest in his story about people getting murdered back at the mansion. Now, this just would not happen in real life in any country in the world. Police just do not ignore kids who are giving them stories about murders. It's absolutely ridiculous. Every time I watch this film, that scene makes me cringe. Now, there are so many other ways they could have handled this character leaving the grounds. I think it's pretty cool that he manages to get over the rails to begin with, because you just don't expect that. But after that, I think they either had to just let him escape and that's the end of it, or just ignore him for a while, and then maybe he suddenly turns back up again in a car with a gun and he wants to help out. But we did not need this silly 3 or 4 minute subplot where he goes off and does all this daft stuff that's just not remotely believable. At one point he tries to flag down a car and they just ignore him, and then he steals a car. It's just silly. This film is not one of those 80-minute films struggling for extra footage. I think it's like touching 100 minutes or something. So those 3 or 4 minutes could have been taken out. I'm deducting at least half a point just for that subplot. Speaking of points, let's find out then what score I'm going to give for this movie. I think it's going to be a good one. But 1, 2, 3, 4 bloody axes out of 5. I probably would have gone to 4.5, but for the police station subplot. There's some really great stuff in this film I didn't even get around to talking about. The early party scenes have some really terrific music. There's a fantastic scare when the two main characters are just sat in the bedroom and one of the killers comes up through the carpet. There's also a great section where they go underground and find like a dead body at this table. It's a wonderful film, Hell Night. I think it's one of the best slasher movies from the golden generation era, in my opinion, and it's one that I will always occasionally go back to. Highly recommended, very highly recommended. Right, that's all for me today. Until next time, cheerio.